started doing interviews. When we started this project, I said, wow, this is the biggest project I've ever worked on in my life. I'm not going to be done until next year. That was almost 10 years ago exactly. But we did, between the two of us, 90 interviews in half a dozen different countries. We interviewed both Israelis and Palestinians who remember 1948 firsthand, refugees, survivors, veterans, and we also interviewed some of the most respected historians of the conflict. And on top of that, we did about 20,000 pages of research between us to make sure that this wasn't just a bunch of stories we're putting up, but fact-based research stories that are based and can be referenced in the history books today. So the first clip we're going to show you is the very beginning of the documentary. We just want to give you a sense of the style, what it's about, and kind of set up the story for you. It's the longest clip we're going to show, but we'll show a few more after that. Let's go ahead and do this.
Can I pause it? Do I pause it? I have
First, for time restrictions, because the film is 1 hour and 26 minutes. And the second reason is that we are doing the film festival round. So we're submitting it at film festivals, and we're trying to focus on that. And we just premiered actually at the Arizona International Film Festival on April 23rd, 2017, this year. Our next screening, for those of you who are either in DC or are willing to make the drive to DC, it's going to be this actually coming Monday, the 5th, at 6 p.m. in the Palestine Center. So if you can make the trip, you can see the whole documentary then. We're just going to show 3 clips. And the next clip is going to be a very important one that might actually summarize for you the whole story of 1948. And I'm going to let Andy actually introduce the clip.
But first, I want to say hi to Hatem. Thanks so much for Didi. It's so good to see you. Hatem drove me around all over the place on my very first trip on producing this documentary 10 years ago. And I think he probably never thought this would actually be real, but it's real now. So thank you so much. The next clip is the story of Ramallah and Linda. And this is an important one because it's one of the few where historians of all stripes agree that there was an explicit plan to push everyone out of these very large towns. And one of the things that we really worked hard on in making this documentary is we didn't want to just show the stories of these people, and so you're hearing their recollections, because there are people who say that oral histories are, they like memory gets fuzzy over the years, which is true. There were lots of people who told us stories, and we would look them up, and they didn't really happen exactly that way. So the stories we have in here, we did our very best to research and ensure that they were backed up by what the history says. But in addition to the oral histories, we also wanted to show documents. And there are many, many documents in the Israeli archives that have military orders that call for the expulsion of a people from a certain village or a group of villages. And so we actually had some researchers go and dig up those documents from the archives, and then they got copies of them to us, and we put them on the screen and then have them translated. So you're going to see the original Hebrew document at the beginning of this clip. You're going to see the original Hebrew document for the expulsion orders for Ramallah and Linda, and then it'll see the English translation over it. And this happens a number of times in the documentary. But I think it's really powerful because it shows in black and white what was specifically ordered, not someone's memory of it, but what was actually written in black and white, typed out and sent to the troops. So I'm going to go ahead and show this. It starts after, basically there was a battle that took place, and this clip starts right after the battle ends.
using original documents like the expulsion, the actual expulsion order, military order of Linda and Ramallah that we showed and we did the translation, that a great deal of the documentation of 1948, especially in terms of massacres, are still classified by the Israeli government. And it was long years of work actually to get access to some of these documents, and you have to actually submit special requests for certain documentation. And one clip we were thinking about actually showing today is the Deir Yassin clip. Then we decided not to show it because we're going to do the screening on Monday. But for example, Deir Yassin, which is the most notorious massacre in the history of the Palestinian Nakba, actually the majority of the documents and even the images, the videos, everything is, most of it is still classified in spite of the fact that we are past the embargo, limit on release of such documents. So imagine, like, we are proud of this film and we think we did a good job at documenting and showing, the events of 1948 before and after. But imagine if we had access to all the documents. Hopefully 1 year we will have access, and then the picture is going to be even more clear at that time when you know what the Israelis are still hiding in the archives. So I'll let Andy introduce the next clip.
How are we doing on time?
It's until 11:50. So how much more time do you need?
Two more clips.
Yeah, we'll do two more short clips.
And they're very shorter than
and the other thing that I want to point out is the photographs. So you notice a lot of photographs in that last one. Those took years of research to find, to dig up. We had dozens of sources for these, and surprisingly, one of our best sources was the Israeli archives. They have an incredible collection of photographs, and they were willing to share them with us, which we were a bit surprised by, but that's where we found almost every photograph, in fact, in that last section.
Can I ask if when you talk about a particular town and you show a photograph, you have actually been able to match that photograph to the town?
Yes,
Yes.
we were very, very insistent about that.
And we did a lot of fact checking for every story. One of the stories of Deir Yassin took us about 8 months actually to finish all the fact checking of all the details of just one story.
Yeah. It took us a long time to find. It took us a long time to find some photographs to illustrate certain stories because it's but we managed to do it, and partially because we wanted this to accurately represent what happened. Partially, there are a lot of places you can go on the web where they will show you images that they claim to be the massacre of Deir Yassin or the people leaving Jaffa or something, and they're just not. And I think that detracts from the credibility of the story. And the story is very powerful as it is, and you don't need to use the wrong photograph. So that was really important to us. I think we collected something like 2,000 photographs from a large variety of sources. And I think there's about a little over 200 in the documentary. So the next clip we're going to show is about return. So what happened was the Israelis pushed Palestinians in a variety of ways off of the land. And then, unlike other wars where the refugees come back, in this one, they were not allowed to come back. And so we have a segment where you get to see both the Israelis, or both people talking about it from both perspectives, both the Israeli and the Palestinian. I will.
Oh yeah. No, خلاص. We can bring one of those. Oh, thank you, Andrew. Hi. Okay, so shall we start? Hi, good morning again. My name is Rabab Abdulhadi. I'm at the Arab and Muslim Ethnicity and Diaspora Studies program at San Francisco State University. And we will be talking more about what's going on at San Francisco State about the question of academic freedom and the corporate university in the afternoon panel. Also, after this, we are actually having the panel on teaching Palestine. And in the afternoon, as Raz said, we have a panel on the U.S.-Israeli security and military collaboration. I just want to add to what Raz has said. In designing this teaching, actually there is a very deliberate way of doing the narrative. To start with the film that Ahlam and Andy, which is incredible and amazing, and I love it, and just give you more love later on. But to start it in order to frame things in this way. But before I start, I just do want to acknowledge that we are meeting on indigenous stolen people's land here in this country, and it's really important to acknowledge that. In general, but it's also very important to acknowledge that in the context of working on Palestine and talking about Palestine. So the teaching begins with, because on Monday is going to be the 50th anniversary of the Israeli occupation of the West Bank, Gaza Strip, Sinai of Egypt, Golan Heights of Syria, and East Jerusalem. And people tend to think about what is going on only in terms of what's going on in the West Bank and Gaza, and actually mostly in the West Bank, because every single part of Palestine, and I think the Israeli and the US have and somewhat succeeded, but not totally, in presenting a discourse of thinking about West Bank is the place where the Palestinians are occupied and where there is a military occupation, so end the occupation and apartheid. Then people talk about Gaza separately in terms of the blockade. Then people talk about Palestinians inside Israel as Israeli Arabs who are needing some kind of civil rights because they are second-class citizens and so on. And then some people talk about the Palestinian refugees as something that fifth and sixth generation, and they are refugees after refugees and so on. And what we are trying to do actually with this teaching and with the work that we are doing 2017, 2018, is to shift the discourse and to shift the way in which people think about Palestine. Imagine Palestine, as a struggle for justice that, as Raz said, is not exceptionalizing Palestine, but it is a struggle for justice that is linked with other struggles for justice. It's not separate from that. Two is to think about Palestine in its totality. That when Palestinians imagine Palestine, they do not imagine just the West Bank. They do not just imagine Ramallah. They do not just imagine Gaza or the 48 areas or Palestinian refugees or those of us who are living in Western global North diasporas and exile. They imagine Palestine in its totality. And they imagine it as a place where people will be living free in a way that actually enables justice for all, brings people together, including those Israelis and those Jewish persons who participated in the destruction of Palestine, in the destruction of the village, in the destruction of the people, in the uprootedness and so on. So it's really important to think about, A, what happened, because we really need to know the history, what has happened, and the history goes back to over 100 years, at least since the Balfour Declaration. Also, to understand what happened in 48, and then to continue talking about, so then we talk today about the Nakba and what happened in the Nakba, and then we will talk about how do we then teach about Palestine, what are the mechanisms, how do we frame it, how do we discuss it, how do we tell our neighbors, our students, our colleagues, our partners, everybody at a cocktail party, at a lunch, wherever, how do we talk about it in a way that we are actually make it accessible to people to understand, the way Andy said that when you understood the Nakba, this is it, everything fell into place, and it actually makes a lot of sense. How do we do that in a way that actually does not reduce, does not flatten, does not erase all these complexities and experiences and what's going on, and doesn't pit it as Palestinians against Jews, because it's not really Palestinians against Jews, it's justice against injustice. And the participation of some Zionists, and there is a long history which I'm not going to go into because we don't have time. I just wanted to say one thing, because we were at the Berkshire conference on the history of women, genders, and sexualities the day before yesterday, and yesterday there was a panel of Jewish feminist activists on Palestine on Thursday, and then we had a panel on Palestinian women, Ahlam and I, and then we had the big plenary last night with fighters from Standing Rock, from Puerto Rico, from Black Lives Matter, and, from transgender movement in New York, and an Israeli scholar, and these activists. So we've done all of this stuff. But at the Jewish panel on Thursday, one of the colleagues mentioned that then in 1960s, the Palestinians, everybody was supporting the Palestinians and so on in the US. And then the OSPAN, which is the Organization of Solidarity with People of Africa, Asia, and Latin America in Cuba, which is based in Cuba, in Havana, was making all these posters in solidarity with the Palestinians. Some of us who are old enough to know the posters, because they were really beautiful, multi-languages and just incredible. But she said one of the posters was of the Jewish star that was exploding. And that, then a lot of people who were supporting Palestine in the left, especially in the Jewish left, they said, this is it, we're not going to be working on it anymore. We had a discussion about that, and it's something we can, and we're going to be talking about it the whole we actually discussed that. I basically said, well, I said at the time, and I actually looked it up since more, that the Jewish star, not the Jewish star, the Israeli star, okay, does not symbolize the Jewish star for the Palestinians. It actually symbolizes Israel. So when you say the star explodes, you're not actually saying you want to explode the Jews and you want to kill the Jews or reproduce the Zionist narrative that Palestinians want to throw the Jews into the sea, which wasn't actually a Palestinian who saw it. Said not even Ahmed Shukri. Okay, it was, I think, it's attributed at some point to Jamal Abdel Nasser, and that requires even more investigation and so on. But that does not symbolize, it's not the same as the yellow star on which that Nazis put on Jewish people during the Holocaust. It's not the same. And then I looked it up, and actually, according to all the documentation, that the star, the Israeli flag, has two blue lines that are supposed to represent the ends of the shawl, the talit, shawl that the religious men wear, and it has the star within it. And now the star actually was adopted by the Zionist movement first. The two triangles was adopted first by the Zionist movement. And it was adopted at the World Zionist Congress in 1897. It was designed in 1891, and it was adopted by the Zionist movement, First Zionist Congress, in 1897. Then later on, Jewish communities adopted it as representative of symbolizing of. I mean, this is Israeli sources, by the way. Okay. And I'm going to talk about sources in a minute. So, but in the minds of Palestinians, nobody believes that the two lines are actually a result of the talent. Nobody believes that. Palestinians believe, and we all grew up thinking that these two lines represent the Nile and the Euphrates, which is representative of the greater Israel plan of the revisionist Israelis such as Jabotinsky and others, that one line is the Nile and the other line is the Euphrates. And this is, by the way, if people of you have read the New York Times and read it religiously and remember what's in it. At one point they had a big article about Tzivi Livni, a while ago, way before they started the Zionist Union in Israel and they did the elections against Likud and Netanyahu. And the first time they talked about that, they actually said that Tzivi Livni's grandfather was one of the founders of the main revisionist Zionist groups, and they had a map on their wall that had Greater Israel. And some people miss these little details, like they don't pay attention to them. I like to think about them a lot. And the way, and I think, so so for the Palestinians, when you say the star explodes, or when Najil Ali of the Hamdallah drawings and so on puts the star explodes, it actually symbolizes Israel. There is different kinds of, in Arabic we say Yahud, different kinds of Yahud, Jews, that are not all the same. So in the mind of the Palestinian narrative, and the way Palestinians interact with each other, there is different Jews. There is the Israelis that hold, the military that hold themselves the Jews when they come into the towns and they occupy and so on. I grew up under occupation. So to me, until I was actually able to leave and go study abroad, I did not know any Jews except the Israeli military, and Felicia Langer, who was the lawyer for my cousin who was in prison for 7 years. This is it. I knew all the Jews were the Israeli military, and one Jewish person who was actually a lawyer, defense lawyer for Palestinian prisoners. I mean, this is the experiences. So I think that's really, really important to keep in mind to think about it. Yeah. But the other thing, I mean, I'm going to just mention a few things, and then in terms of oral history, I also remember like Samia Khoury, who I've known, like I used to call her auntie when I was little. I do remember because my mother used to tell us, and my aunt and my father, that there is a family, Palestinian family, who came from Yafa, Abu Zayd, and they were displaced in 1948. And then they came to my grandparents' house in Nablus, and this is where they were. But I also know that my aunt, her family also were displaced from Majda. They were in Majda, and they actually had to take a boat. They had to take a boat. Had to take a boat from Majda to Beirut, and almost her children died, and they became refugees as a result. And in that sense, Andras spoke about the whole question of gender and sexuality and so on. So I just want to mention a couple of things that are actually important as well. One is that my aunt she convinced her grandfather, who was a big sheikh, to let her go study by herself. So she went and studied in Ramallah at the French school by herself on her own, taking her. And my grandfather was actually sold a lot of his land and so on in order to fight in the 1930s against in the great strike, in the great Palestinian strike, 1936-39. And you will hear me speak about this, and I speak about it all the time. I don't say first intifada, second intifada. I say 1987 intifada, Aqsa intifada, because there have been multiple intifadas in the history of Palestine. But what's really interesting, because a lot of also the Israeli narrative actually says that in 1948, Palestinians fled. Now, of course, you have an amazing documentary that shows, with documentation, with interviews, everything, that Palestinians did not. They didn't just pick up and go. They didn't flee, they didn't sell their land. There were only like 2 big Lebanese families who sold land before, in the early 30s, 40s, and so on. But the Palestinians, majority of the Palestinians did not sell their land. Then the second part of it is that Palestinians fled because they were afraid for the women to be raped, because they prioritized honor before land. And this is why they did it. So they just packed their girls and their women and left. And actually, this is very far from the truth. This is a narrative that gets constructed because anthropology, as a social science, and we are in a college here, constructs a thing about Mediterranean societies have honors and have vendetta and have everything else. Everywhere else, a partner kills a woman, it's a crime of passion. It's violence against women. With us, it has to be named something different. It has to be called honor. It has to be connected to honor and so on. It's a very big discussion, but I want to say that this actually was not the case. And if you kind of like go over it and hear narratives after narratives after narratives, some people will say maybe in the back of our minds we were worried, but they will say we were worried about us being killed, we were worried about the children being maimed, we were worried about women being raped. I mean, they were worried about all sorts of things, and rape did happen in 48, but it's not a story that is well said and well known. Now there are some accounts coming out actually among Bedouin Palestinians who saying what is going on. Not all of the stuff in the Israeli archives is being. So this is another, the 2 more points, 2, 3 more points. One is about Abu Haja, who was talking about his village. So he goes to his village and they said they do all these statues and so on. And it's Ain Hod, and I don't know how many people know about this. This is a Palestinian village that wasn't destroyed out of the 532 villages that were destroyed in 48. It was turned into an artist colony. And it's very interesting. There is a film called 500 Dunams on the Moon that is made by an young Israeli, was a filmmaker at New York University. And it's available. Her name is Rachel Jones. I highly recommend it because it actually shows what's happening in Ain Hod, how the tourist guides imagine and talk about Ain Hod. How the Israelis who are living in Palestinian homes say that the Palestinians did not really care for these ancient places, and we are the ones who are restoring, and we appreciate culture and high art and so on. And when you go to Ain Hod, for me, actually, it's one of the most violent places because there is the cultural appropriation. There is the huge wheel. It's a stone that turns around to cold pressed olive oil. And they've taken it and they put it in the museum in the middle of the village. All the homes have been taken over. And all the homes have been turned into all these artists. And this is not, quote unquote, the zealous settlers that people, that the New York Times or where anybody else represents, that this is actually what these people are. The rest of the Israeli society is actually quite reasonable, quite nice, wants to live in peace with the Palestinians and so on. And we know this is not the case today. And we need to ask ourselves why and how do we change that when we talk about strategies. But this is not the case. The majority of the Israeli society has elected Netanyahu, and people even to the Netanyahu to power. These are the people who are ruling in Israel. The majority of the Israeli public has not done what it needs to do, and it's not so unusual. Again, it's not exceptional. It's not because Israel is a special case, or the Jewish people in Israel are a special case, or whatever. If you go and do a poll in the United States and ask people, what are you going to do about the indigenous population? What are you going to do about the land you're living on, which is a stolen land? People were decimated. People may say, well, you know, we'll sign a petition for Standing Rock, but if you ask people, are you going to get out of your home? And let's just say there will be hesitation. Okay. And I'm saying this because I think we really need to think about the whole question of culpability and complicity and how we're all complicit, not only in furthering the oppression disposition of Palestinians, but everywhere. And I'm challenging us, and I know some people don't like to hear that, and some people will say, well, we're talking about Palestine, we're about to mobilize people to go against Israeli apartheid and to sign BDS and so on. Why you're bringing these things that make it more complicated? Because we really need to be. We need to talk about the indivisibility of justice. We cannot just talk about justice for some, but not justice for all. We really need to be accountable for it. The same way we talk about, if we talk about Palestine people, and we are as Palestinians accountable to talk about gender and sexual justice, about racial, about economic, and so on. That goes for everybody. It doesn't only apply in one place. It is not acceptable just to ask Palestinians to kind of like uphold the indivisibility of justice in one context, but then it doesn't apply to everybody else. Everybody else can get away with it. Pinkwashing can happen. The whole representation of Israel as the haven for women's rights and so on can happen. All of it does. It's not okay. We really need to kind of like bring everything together. Two more points I wanted to. And by the way, in terms of Ain Hod, we actually had one of the elders, Hassan Abulhaja, who actually lives. Abulhaja family was all in Ain Hod. They were all displaced. So there is a little place for them. That is not even spelled the same way in Hod. That finally, so he told us, we had a delegation last year, the prisoner and academic and labor delegation to Palestine. And he stood there near the cemetery of Ain Hod, which the Israelis keep using it as dumping ground, as garbage. They dump the garbage there. So he stood next to the cemetery of his ancestors. And he was telling us about all that has happened because he was part of negotiations with the Israeli authorities to allow people to return to their families. And he said they cut off the water, they cut off the food, they cut off the transport supplies and so on. There is a whole bunch of, we're actually working on these videos to put them online, and maybe we'll ask you guys, we're the experts, to make them like much nicer because we were amateurs doing it. But one of the interesting things that has happened, and this is why it's really important, not to only talk about the Nakba that continues, but to also talk about how the memories are kept alive and continue. Because Azam Abulhaja was standing there telling us the stories in the presence of his child and his child's child. So the child's child was taken in the memories and remembering what was going on here, and probably didn't get everything that the grandfather said because there were too many details. I mean, I have to go over and say, what did you say? How did you meet with this? And then the Israelis told them at one point, if you accept Ain Hod, well, you'll give up on the other villages, it's okay. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. And so there was all this, and he remembers the names of the Israeli officials that they were. So this is kind of like keeping the memories. One more thing about the 20,000. This is, I think, is really, really important for research purposes. Ahlam and Andy said today, and I've heard Ahlam speak many times about saying that we gathered 20,000 documents, 20,000 pages of research. You did. Andy said today 2,000 photos. Hundreds of people. How many people you've interviewed? 90 some long interviews. Or
Actually,
interviews.
I did also interviews before we did the film that we didn't use them in the film. So I have a huge collection from
Why? Okay, so why do Palestinians have to document and over-document and over-document and over-document? And they keep saying it every single time. And I actually sometimes get irritated, like, the story should be told. Because every single time you tell a story of Palestinians, and again, Palestinians are not exception, or any colonized and marginalized people, the story is not believed until a member of the colonizing society comes and puts a stamp of approval and authenticity on it. You are never believed. Palestinians have historically told their stories again and again and again. And the only time the Palestinian narrative, and I'm saying narrative and narratives, of Nakba, of what has happened, of 36, of the whole question of honor and so on, all of this stuff has been said so many times, it was not taken, it wasn't accepted until something called the New Israeli Historians, really great group of people, wonderful, we're very thankful to them, we're very appreciative, until they were able to come out, use the declassified Israeli archive because they had first access to it. Of course, Palestinians are not going to have first access to it, okay? And were able to say, you know what, there's something wrong that has happened with that history. So Ahlam Papi comes up with this book of the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, Benny Morris, a whole bunch, Avi Schleim, a lot of people came out and started writing about this. And then people say, oh, this is what happened. This is exactly what happened because the Israeli scholars said it happened. Then the Palestinian stories get validated. However, it gets validated and filtered through the Israeli centered perspective, even though it's anti-Zionist and sometimes not always anti-Zionist, but it's, even though it is a humanitarian perspective, it's not the perspective of the Palestinians themselves. So it's really, so sometimes it's even Palestine without Palestinians. There was a conference last week in London which had all these Israelis speaking about 67 without actually having Palestinians. 2 young Palestinian scholars wrote about it, Ajadaliya, if you would like to check it out. So I think it is actually really troubling that we have to continue documenting and substantiating again and again and again. And the last thing about memory, and Andy said memory is fuzzy. Yes, memories are fuzzy. There is something else with the Palestinian story, maybe in the rest of your film, is the collective memory. And I will just say one thing from my own experience. I used to always tell the story that after 67, because I was we were living in Nablus, and still my family is still there, in West Bank. After 67, things opened up. What does it mean? That the Palestinians in the 48 areas and the Palestinians 67 came together. So my parents packed us in a car, and they took us to see a building that my grandfather had in Haifa. They used to call it Shara al-Muluk, the King's Street. It doesn't exist anymore. And the land of Zer'in, which is in Muhtaseb. It's very close to Jeannine. We still have a little bit part of it. It's called Jazair. But that, okay, to show us the land. And I remember so distinctly that we went to the building, and an Israeli woman was putting up her laundry on the clothesline, and she would not let us go in. Then many years later, I was talking to my parents. They both passed, and I said, did this happen? And they said, I don't really remember. My mother said, I don't remember. My father, they're not oral history buffs, so they're not really concerned too much with the details. And then I started talking to my sister. I said, do you remember? And my sister does also some part of oral history and so on. And she said, I'm not sure. I do not know. So we're trying to figure out what was happened. That at that time, the whole quote-unquote controversy about whether Edward Said lived in his home in Tel Aviv or did not, that was taken over by Israelis, and now Israelis are living in it, whether it happened or not, and then whether Edward Said's narrative, actually story, is credible or not credible. And you remember Kramer and Daniel Pipes and Bernard Lewis, they all attacked Edward Said big time, saying, oh, it's not true because there is a little detail. And one of the things I kind of, the analysis, the understanding of it is that there is some kind of a collective memories that I may not actually remember the particular details, but somebody said it so many times, because we do know many Palestinians tried to go back and visit their family homes, and they wouldn't let in. They wouldn't let in. The people, and now you have somebody in the film who said that. The people were not let in to see their own homes, let alone be able to live back into their own homes, or get their homes back. So it may have happened, so I'm not sure, I question my memory about it. I'm not sure if it actually happened. I do know we went. I remember we went, because I remember my mother was very much into boycott, so we could not even get a glass of water from any Israeli. We have to fill the car up with gas in Jeannine, Uncle Queelia, the last stop before, like not chips, nothing. Everything we bring from Nablus, we are not getting anything from the Israelis. Like, don't you have any dignity? You cannot. You cannot patronize people who are oppressing you. So I do remember, that I remember very clearly. She continued with that. But I do not remember if it was actually us, if it actually happened, and I checked with my
stories merged.
The stories merge, and so the collective memory, and it's not just in the case of the Palestinians. If you talk to indigenous people, if you talk to people who are passing even the whole histories of the slavery, people died, they're not alive anymore. So we do not know except what is written in the colonial records, because people don't get to tell their story. The colonized don't get to tell their story, the victors get to tell their story, and they tell the story however they want, and however it suits their purposes. So one of the reasons we are here today is in order for us to see if we can restore truth to history. And the film is one of that. So I'm very grateful to actually having a discussion on it, and thank you.
What was the name of that film you mentioned about
It's called 500 Dunams on the Moon. It's Rachel Leah John.
And I want to recommend the book I'm reading right now that's so wonderful by Suad Amiri called Golda Slept Here. It's a memoir of a family that is telling this story over, but so beautifully written. Golda Slept Here. Okay, at last.
I wanted to mention a film.
Can you just
My name is Jim Kavanaugh. I've been a supporter of I was supporting you guys on Kickstarter from the beginning. But I also wanted to mention a film that I saw about 10 years ago called Inner Tour. And it was by a Palestinian, Israeli Jewish and a Palestinian director. And they took an old Palestinian guy and they brought him back. It was before a lot of the conflicts that recently and
You write down
it was one of these, the Inner Tour was one.
I'm going to write the 500 Dunams, and you write the other one, so we keep the resources here. Okay, so you start, and then I'll do the other one after. So let's say, you know what, let's see films. So we can put all the resources
It's
here.
going to be available somewhere. I could probably send it to you. I have DVD of it. It was really lovely. And they brought this guy back to the wreckage of his village. And they brought him to one, I don't think it was that town, another town where the Israelis had a little museum, and they were giving a lecture. And oh, here's when we won this battle, and the guy comes in and he starts saying, "Oh yeah, I remember what that meant." It was a very powerful film. I remember at the time.
Can I also? We also have an extensive, about 15 or 16 pages of references that we used in documentary, like a bibliography. If anyone's interested, we would be more than happy to share that with you. It's not 100% comprehensive, but it is to a great extent comprehensive.
Far more than you ever want to read.
All right, it's 15 pages.
You go right to the resources. We're going to keep them on the board.
Yeah, but I mean, this is a bibliography,
yes,
so I could email it to people.
Here,
I can't try
I'll write
to.
my favorite book on this word.
No, just write the list of the bibliography, so we can, people, if they want to, they can follow up after, because this is being streamed live and it's going to be online.
It's on our website, actually.
How do we reach you?
To do that.
Okay.
Oh, maybe the
Website
website?
on the board.
And you have cards here
People
for me
have
and-
questions or comments, but this is a long presentation, but please share your, yes, back there.
Oh, no, I was.
I'm just stretching. Okay, so it all stretch, that's a good idea too. Okay, yes.
Yeah, it's
And
quite
say your
an
name.
amazing film.
Name?
I was wondering what the plans
Name?
were for the film.
What's your name?
Of Jim Squire. About where it's going to be shown, and are there any plans to show it in various cities in like regular theaters, and JVP could sponsor it, or whoever. Because I think, Americans know nothing about the situation, and all the politicians, there was a recent vote in the Senate, it was like 100-0 so this is something supporting the state of Israel. It's just, like Bernie Sanders is terrible. on the whole Israeli-Palestinian thing. It's sort of like, the most progressive. So I don't know if this could be used, somehow to, alter the opinions of the American public in some way.
We hope so. And actually, the intended audience we have in mind are people like Gandhi. But I'm joking. But average Americans who know nothing or very little about the whole context of 1948 and the so-called conflict. So absolutely. Now, in terms of our plan, as I said, now we are in the film festival plan or round. So we are trying to maximize that as much as we can. We are applying left and right to film festivals. If anyone have any contacts or networking with film festivals, please come and talk to us afterwards. Would love to have more connections in that area. After that, then, we have a lot of interest from educational institutions. Many professors approach us and they want to have a screening and invite us to talk on their campuses. So that's also probably it's going to start happening next year, along with different community institutions and organizations. So we are open. We have to wait a little bit now, but eventually next year, I think this is when
probably
we are
even later this year.
Yeah.
But we're getting a lot of interest from a number of groups already, and we haven't even really promoted this documentary at all. So if you're interested in having your group screen it, let me know. You can put it on the paper, and we can put you on the list for when we kind of get there. We're still sort of sorting out the plan for distribution. But you want to go on?
I want to also, actually I would like to be even more deliberate and pushy about it and say to people that really plan things. We are here. This is an academic, this is a conference of scholars and public intellectuals who work on left issues and trying to change the world and so on. And we are live. We're streaming live, so people are hearing it. So I really want to make a very strong push for scheduling a lot of this stuff now. Kind of like, this is a very good way of doing it in the classroom. We will talk more about it, about how do we do this in teaching Palestine, but I don't think it's never too late to start. So this is something that people can show in the classroom. It's a documentary. It's a very credible documentary, and even for the naysayers and the doubters and so on, it's available. People should now schedule it for the fall and for the spring, because this coming year, in addition to the Balfour Declaration, November 2nd, it is the 35th anniversary of the Sabra and Shatila massacre on September 17th. It is also the 30th anniversary of the 1987 Intifada, the 70th anniversary of UN partition of Palestine. There is multiple, and then there Yasin, April 9th, 2018, Nakba, May 15th. So there is the whole year, there's going to be activities all over the, there is a huge activity around the Balfour Declaration in November. There's going to be a lot. Palestinians are mobilizing all over the world. And we're doing a very big campaign. Part of it is to deliver 100,000 signatures to the British Parliament, so they will have to discuss it. This is part of the British law or something. We're not sure if we're going to get the 100,000 by November 2nd, but doesn't matter because it's an ongoing campaign. So please schedule activities in your communities, in your connect with, in your colleges, in your. Let's just make this happen.
You can contact us, yes.
We're going to create a list and
Please
just
come and
check the website.
Jim also mentioned Congress people. We have a big job to do. And lobbying is not my favorite thing, but we have to do this. We have to get this message to the decent people who think they're decent human beings, the liberals in Congress. Yes, please.
I would suggest that everybody
Yes, can you say your name?
in this room.
What's your name?
My name is Cynthia Walters. I'm a retired school librarian from the state of New Jersey. I would suggest if we all are, many of us retired, I hope, that you pick up Orientalism by Edward Said, because it's all in there. The Palestinian problem was part of a move to colonize the entire world, and they fell right in. And the book hits the mark as nothing else historically. It's called Orientalism, written by Edward Said, who passed, how many years ago is it now?
2003.
Okay, but that's a book for people who really want to understand the terrible things that went on in there. It's Orientalism by
Yes.
Edward Said.
I think
He
most
is
of
the
us know that
master
book,
of
but
the whole
Thank you for
area.
reminding us. Great. Okay, sir. Yes, you say your name.
My name is Yousef Buttercat. I was born in Haifa, Palestine, 1935. I used to cross the Jordan River on horseback as a child. I was put on a ship in 48 and landed at Ellis Island when I was 12 years old. I've been in Michigan since then. I'll be speaking here tomorrow in this room at 12 noon. I would love for everybody to show up and get another perspective.
Thank you, Yousef. Thank you. Bonnie.
I want to thank you for this film because it makes things so
Little louder, Bonnie.
accessible. I want to thank you for the film because it makes the whole issue so accessible. I, like Roz, just returned from that same
You were
trip.
on the same trip.
On the same trip, and I have just been overwhelmed trying to piece together how to share this with people, and this film is just a wonderful entree into the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It means a lot.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Olga Wiesman. I wanted to thank you for the film. You mentioned that you used people, researchers, to go into the archives. I want to know how many other people, or how did you get them involved? You remember you talked about... Oh,
Yeah. So there are a lot of the materials in the archives are still classified, but I think still at this point the vast majority are unclassified and they're available. The trick is getting access to them, and part of that is just lack of it's just a bureaucratic mess. It's a little bit less, like an attempt to hide all this information, and more just it's messy. So I went through. We had a few different people do research in the archives, and the best one.
Were these students? That's what I'm trying to
No, well, I sort of started with people who didn't have any experience, and then moved up to someone who had a lot of experience, and has published several books of photographs from the archives. And she's an Israeli, and she was able to get basically everything I asked for, except for documents and photographs related to Deir Yassin, which are still classified to this day.
Just want to tell an anecdote about trying to have access to some of those documents. We submitted a request to the Israeli government through her.
In fact, she was the one who did it.
Yes, and they formed a committee. It took like 2-3 months probably, and then for the response.
I don't think they formed the committee. It was sent to the Minister of Justice, Ayelet Shaked.
Who said that we should kill the small snakes before they become.
So it was put on.
Meaning Palestinians were snakes.
Yeah, a request for the photographs and documents from Deir Yassin were put on her desk.
Yeah.
And not surprisingly, we haven't heard back.
And I just want to add, there's one resource in the book that Roz mentioned, Arab American Feminism, Gender Violence and Belonging. There is an article by Shireen Saikoli. Actually, she's now a historian at University of California, Santa Barbara, and just came out with a book called Men of Capital. But she was looking at the Israeli archives because she wanted to document what kind of economic life Palestinians had before 48. That is something that doesn't get mentioned. A lot of the time people say, oh, the Palestinians were destitute and so on. But there was actually a middle class. I mean, however you think about it, she has actually very good critical analysis. But there was also a middle class. It was a community like any other society. And so she talks about this, but she talks in that article about sitting in the Israeli archives and actually looking at the Israeli archives. She is a Palestinian young woman who is a descendant of Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. And so once she has US citizenship, she goes and she requests permission as a historian to study the Israeli archives. And she talks about sitting there, looking at the archives with the Israeli soldiers watching her. And it's actually a very beautiful, moving, and it's disturbing, you know, and again, but that is something that you may want to look at. Because I was going to say it wasn't Ahlam who went and looked at it, it was you who looked at it, so it's actually, that really needs to be said.
Yeah.
The access with which some people, the ease with which some folks get access and others don't. So even when
By the way, I just have to explain that I was not able to make inside what is called Israel now, or the Green Line, because I still have the Palestinian ID of the West Bank. So even when I tried 2 years ago to do some research in Jerusalem and I applied for a special permit, I was rejected or denied, entry. So number one, I can't have physical access. And probably the reason why we have some of the very frank and honest interviews by some of those Israelis, and all of them fought in 1948, is the fact that the average American white guy went and interviewed them. Imagine if I went there and I asked them to tell me their story of 1948. Yeah, so that's a very important point, which is the point of privilege and access that we really have to acknowledge.
Just was wondering, if it's important to influence young people, if you have any plans to, or any requests to show it in high schools. It's hard to do things within the curriculum, but
absolutely. I mean, we are really, I think, we would, originally when we had this idea, the main focus for us was getting it on PBS, and hopefully that's going to happen. We're still working on that. And also educational institutions and access to students. So I absolutely agree with you. Like maybe conventions for high school teachers, also all kinds of associations as much as we can. Of course, it's mainly me and Andy. We have a team of researchers and scholars who helped us. Some people did like editing, some did like worked on the voice or different things, animations. But in general, it's mainly me and Andy, and so we're doing our best. We might hire someone for the distribution, someone who specialized actually in film distribution very soon, because yes, there is a lot of potential, and we would like to get as much as exposure as we could.
Yes, Jonathan.
I'm Jonathan Buxbaum. I teach at CUNY, and I have a question about the Israeli veterans of the 48 war whom you interviewed. The only example we have here where someone looks back on it and says, well, it wasn't right or wrong, it was just a fact. And I'm wondering whether any of the veterans look back differently, whether they felt, no, it was wrong, or it was right. I mean, either way.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'll let Andy expand more on it because he was the one who did most of the interviews. But in general, we had a spectrum of Israeli voices. Yousef, for example, the guy who said we started fighting in English, I don't know, it was very short if you notice him. He's a total denier, and he says, we did not push the Arabs out, they just left, etc. The very, classical, Israeli narrative. And we have people like what you mentioned who say, well, I'm not really sure if it's right or wrong, it was sad, some remorse there. But we have people who have remorse, and one of them is Hava Keller, the woman you saw, who became a very hardcore activist. But even when she had moments of clarity, all of them fought in 1948. When she had a moment of clarity, she still actually fought in the war. I mean, she says when we show the Akka or Acre segment, she says she entered the house and she found small shoes for a baby. And obviously people left during a main meal, so the food was on the table. And she describes the scene very, very beautifully, actually, like you live the scene. And then she looks at the shoes of the baby, and that kind of strikes her as, until then, war was dangerous for me, but only when that moment, war became ugly. She started crying and saying, I have to give the baby, find the baby and give the baby the shoes, etc. But at the same time, she goes on with fighting with the Haganah. So we did not have someone who, so we had a spectrum. So you have those people who have remorse, and we have Yaakov Keller and others.
And I think that the one that sort of really struck me the most was Mordechai Bar-On, who he was a company commander in the Haganah, and he's also a famous historian in Israel. And what struck me about him was that he was so frank about it. There was like a lot of people would say like, "Oh, we didn't push them off the land," or maybe it happened. I saw refugees, but I didn't understand why. It was a very popular thing to say. In fact, probably the most popular thing to say is, "We don't talk about this. I'm not going to do an interview with you." It actually took months to like find people who would talk to us. But Mordechai Bar-On, he said, he describes very frankly and clearly how people were pushed off the land. There's a scene where he explains like the step-by-step process early in the fighting, where they would start off with the mortar fire, and then they would move with their company forward, firing bursts of machine gun fire, and then by the time they got to the village, there was nobody left because they'd all run away. But still, even though he's telling you what happened, he doesn't really, that this is still the place he wants to live in. And the words he used are, at one point he describes people fleeing from Ramallah and Linda and how awful it was and how terrifying it was for the people who fled. And then he pauses and says, but that doesn't mean I want them to come back, because that's not the kind of state I want to live in.
I want to add a couple of things. One is actually somebody who fought in the Palmach in 1948, but actually not only talked about remorse, and she's dead now. It's Arna Khamis. Arna Khamis, and this is the film I put it in, Arna's Children. She was actually, she did fight, and she talks about, we killed Arabs, when somebody interviews her. But what she did is she went on to form the Jeannine Freedom Theater, and to actually do theater drama for the Palestinian children in the Jeannine refugee camp. And the film was made by her son right before she died. She had cancer, and she was also with Mahsoum Watch, the Israeli women's group that watches the checkpoints and so on. And it was just amazing. But she speaks about it. One of our critiques, we do it in the class on Palestine, and one of the critiques is that, but she doesn't talk more. But she, in her life, she atones for it by changing her life altogether. And this raises the question, especially because we're talking about Nakba. Before we continue, so every single time we're adding a column for ideas, suggestions, what do we want to do, and so on. We will continue throughout the day, but one of the questions we're talking about the Nakba. There is a historical wrong. So how do you hold people accountable? Is it enough? And today there are also Israeli soldiers who go against the occupation and so on. Is it enough for people to say it was wrong? Is it enough to have accountability? How do you do that? I mean, a lot of Palestinians are so happy whenever an Israeli speaks up and says something. It's like, oh, the courageous voices. What about all the courageous Palestinians who are, steadfast under occupation? I don't want to. It's not about comparison, but it's about actually recentering the question on the people who are colonized, on the people who've been affected, not on the emotions and the feelings and how hurt people who have been doing the colonizing are. Because at the end of the day, go to therapy, if that is the question. And I'm saying that facetiously. And I think definitely we should definitely support people who are in Israel who are actually challenging the system. I just think that it's really important to kind of to have a perspective on things, to see who was, this is the same thing that's going to come up when we discuss the academic boycott and everything, is kind of like what happened to Israeli scholars, and we say what happens to Palestinian scholars and teachers and education institutions and so on. So this one, Arna's Children, is really great. And in terms of the identity, and people remember, I interviewed children who are in Shatila, who are third generation of refugees. And when you ask them, nobody says, I'm from Shatila. They say, I'm from Safauriya. I'm from these villages don't even exist anymore. So there is this kind of yearning, because it's also a center of identity. It's also a center of pride. When you're living in horrible conditions, what really allows you to continue to live pride every single day is the ability, the possibility, the potential that you will be able to be restored to your land and to be able to have some kind of recourse. Yes, sir.
My name is Hatem Kanani. I'm a retired physician, Palestinian citizen of Israel. There's so much to say, but I'll try to be very brief. in response to the gentleman's question, the majority, the clear majority of Israelis who fought in 1948 draw a line under that. The problem started in 1967 for the most liberal ones, period. They will not debate or look at or talk about 1948. That's closed case. Okay, that's one.
Including J Street, by the way.
The second thing I wanted to mention a book relevant to Ain Hod. By the way, there are two Ain Hods. The original, and there's the new one that was established by one family that escaped, and long story, but there's the Arab Ain Hod still, the new one, and the old one. On occasion, I take some friends who are visiting or friends of Sabil on a tour to Ain Hod, where I have a friend there, and we always park the bus or the car in the parking area in the front of the bar in the center of the town. The parking lot is the cemetery of the village. I mean, no ifs and buts. That's the cemetery of the village. Village completely cleared and cemented and busy. And the bar, I usually don't go in, and if I go in, I don't order a beer. But I recommend everybody to go in and order a beer, because that's the mosque of the village, the bar. So, that's enough. Now, there's a book that's worth reading. It's a novel. That's called Susan Abul Hawa. No, that's another one.
No, she's the one who wrote, what is it called?
Yes, that's
memories or something. She talks about Ain Hod, Susan Salama.
That's right, but that's more of a
academic
research, and very valuable, of course. I know Susan, but the other one is more light reading, and it is called Morning in Jeannine by Susan Abul Hawa. She has another wonderful newer novel. It's about the 1967 war and what happened to refugees in Gaza. Okay, the last book I will mention, very worthwhile, by an Israeli researcher. Her name is Noga Kadman, and the book is called Erased from Space and Memory. And it is analytical sort of discourse about the 531 Palestinian villages that were erased. And the decision-making behind that process and how Israel handles that to this day. Very, very excellent, detailed book. The last comment I will make about that, okay, that she starts the book with one paragraph from an Israeli leftist writer. Now the name escapes me, but he epitomizes the whole process of erasure, okay? And he's a very well-known leftist, like Uri Avneri, and a personal friend of Uri Avneri. And she talks a lot about all of the Palestinian erased villages and addresses the issue of Deir Yassin and the second most famous massacre in 1948. And in both of those, the same writer who she quotes participated. He was one of the people that committed, and she doesn't make the connection at all. That is the typical liberal Israeli stuff. Here.
Thank you, Hatem, and thank you, everybody. We are really at the end of time, but I want to call your attention to this flyer we sent out. Everybody can participate in a protest.